Sophia Ramirez had exactly $14 in her checking account and a car that made a grinding noise every time she braked, but she still stopped when she saw the old man collapse near the flower stand outside the coffee shop. She didn't know, in that moment, that helping a stranger to his feet would change the entire direction of her life. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that a single small act can ripple into something enormous, hit like on this video right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a reminder that good still exists, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so you never miss a story like this one. The man was elderly, dressed in a suit that looked expensive but worn, as if he'd owned it for decades and refused to let it go. He gripped his chest for a moment, then waved off her concern, insisting he was fine, just dizzy from the heat. Sophia helped him to a bench anyway, sat with him until his breathing steadied, and offered him the bottle of water she'd bought for herself. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask why a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom was sitting alone on a cracked bench in a neighborhood most people avoided after dark. She simply stayed, because that was who she was, even on days when staying cost her something. And it did cost her something. Sophia was 3 weeks behind on rent, working double shifts as a home health aide, caring for elderly patients who often treated her with more suspicion than gratitude. She sent half of every paycheck to her younger brother, who was finishing community college 2 states away, determined that at least one of them would have a future that didn't involve exhaustion as a permanent condition. She hadn't bought herself anything new in over a year. She hadn't slept more than 5 hours a night in longer than that. But she had never once, not in the darkest stretches of her 20s, refused to help someone who needed it, even when helping meant she had less. The old man, whose name she eventually learned was Richard Hargrove, began showing up at that same coffee shop every few days, always at the same bench, always looking for her. At first she thought it was loneliness, and in a way it was. But there was something else in the way he studied her, something searching, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. He asked about her family. He asked about her brother. He asked, more than once, why a woman with clearly no time to spare kept finding time for a stranger. She told him the truth, that she'd grown up with nothing, that people had shown her mercy when she desperately needed it, and that she'd promised herself she would pass that mercy forward for as long as she lived, even if it never came back to her. Richard listened to all of it with an intensity that unsettled her, though she couldn't have said why. What she didn't know was that Richard Hargrove was not simply a tired old man with nowhere to be. He had built and sold 2 companies in his lifetime, had more money than he could spend in 3 more lifetimes, and had spent the last decade completely alone after losing his wife and, years before that, a daughter who would have been about Sophia's age had she lived. He had stopped trusting people the moment his fortune became public knowledge, watching family and friends alike transform into strangers hungry for a piece of him. He had wandered into that neighborhood on the worst day of a long depression, half hoping something would happen to him, and instead a stranger in a fast food uniform had knelt beside him on the pavement and asked if he was okay. One afternoon, weeks into their unlikely friendship, Richard handed her an envelope with trembling hands and asked her to do something for him, something he called his final request. Inside was not money, as she nervously assumed, but a letter, and instructions to deliver it in person to an address across town, to a family he said he hadn't spoken to in 11 years. He told her he was dying, that the doctors had given him months, not years, and that pride had cost him more time with the people he loved than any disease ever could. He said he trusted her, of all people, to make sure his words reached them, because she was the only person in years who had shown him kindness without knowing what he had to offer in return. Sophia wanted to refuse. It felt too large, too personal, too heavy to carry for someone she'd known such a short time. But she thought of every stranger who had ever helped her without asking for anything, and she understood, with sudden clarity, that this was simply her turn to be that person for someone else. She drove across town that same evening, letter in hand, heart hammering, and knocked on the door of a modest house where a woman around her own mother's age answered, eyes widening the instant she saw the envelope and recognized the handwriting on the front. That woman was Richard's estranged daughter-in-law, and behind her stood two grandchildren Richard had never once met, children who had grown up hearing only bitter fragments of a man they'd been taught to resent. The letter, it turned out, was an apology 11 years in the making, an admission of the pride and stubbornness that had cost Richard his family, and an invitation, however late, to let him be a grandfather for whatever time he had left. Sophia stood on that porch and watched a family's frozen grief begin, slowly and painfully, to thaw, and she realized she had just witnessed something far bigger than a favor between two strangers. In the months that followed, Richard reunited with his family, meeting his grandchildren for the first time, walking them through a life he'd spent decades hiding behind a locked office door. And when he passed, quietly and at peace, his will contained a provision that stunned everyone who knew the two of them, a trust fund for Sophia's education and her brother's future, along with a letter thanking her for reminding an old, broken man that dignity could still be found in strangers, and that it was never too late to try to make things right. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that kindness matters even when no one is watching, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because stories like Sophia's deserve to reach more hearts. Before you go, I want you to do one thing for me. Type the word kindness in the comments below if you believe, like Sophia did, that a small act of compassion can change a life forever. Sophia never expected that helping a stranger off a bench would rewrite her future, but sometimes the smallest moments of decency are the ones that carry us furthest, proving that kindness given freely always, somehow, finds its way back home.